This is the United Arab Emirates. We all have seen the expensive cars, unbelievable architecture, and luxurious lifestyle in UAE. It is so wonderful to see a country that is built on a desert, having all the wealth you could ever imagine. This country, which looks like a heaven today, was just a desert with low population. In the early days, this region was controlled by sheikdoms. In those days, the pearl industry was a major income source and employment of these sheikdoms. At the same time, it was known for piracy, and became a threat to much of the British trade carrying goods from India. So to protect the trading route, the British signed different agreements with local rulers. But for the British, these kingdoms in the desert were not that important. For them it was just a strategically important stop, that connected the British ship to India. That's why they never invested any money in infrastructure projects here. So development never happened in this area. Moreover, economic depression of the late 1920s and early 30s coupled with the invention of the artificial pearl, wiped out the trade. The remnants of the trade eventually faded away shortly after the Second World War, when the newly independent government of India, which was one of the biggest markets for pearls, imposed heavy taxation on pearls imported from the Arab states. This was a bit of a problem, but fortunately the discovery of oil gave another chance for this region to grow. Shortly after the discovery of oil in the 60s, the seven Emirates came together to form the United Arab Emirates, and declared independence from the British in 1971. Here the journey of the modern-day UAE started, with the help of a massive oil boom in the country. The country's economy increased manifold in the coming years. Oil exports become the driver of their economy. Most of the revenue generated from oil was spent on constructing roads, highways, buildings, and other infrastructure projects. They also invested heavily in the education and healthcare sector, which improved the quality of life of the citizens. This all seemed pretty good. I mean, your imports are low and your exports are high, just because you found commodities in your country. In one way it is right, but UAE does import things that are not on paper, which is manpower. You see, building oil wells with roads and shipping ports to transport that oil, requires a lot of infrastructure, since the need for foreign labor increased. From 1975 onwards, non-nationals have consistently outnumbered the number of nationals residing within the Emirates. Indian, Bangladeshi, Filipinos, and Pakistani workers make up nearly 90% of the workforce. So it is very common that you might easily find an Indian or a Pakistani, or even Bangladeshi people on the streets of Dubai rather than Emirati citizens. However, the quality of life of these immigrant workers is not very good. They often live in poor conditions and do mostly labor-intensive jobs for long hours. Yet these are still better paying jobs than they have in their own country. So basically you can say, oil and migrants have built the UAE that we see today. But there is a problem with all the oil-rich nations, specifically those countries whose economy is dependent on oil exports. We have to understand, the oil wealth is not forever, and the prices of oil in the international market are very volatile. Just a couple of years ago during the pandemic, oil prices reached their lowest value of a decade. So dependency on oil is unpredictable and unreliable. Due to this reason, the UAE is trying to diversify its economy. Beginning in the 1980s, the UAE promoted industrial development by establishing firms in manufacturing industries associated with oil and gas, including refineries, fertilizer plants, and aluminum smelters. The UAE has since made some progress in terms of its economic diversification efforts. In 2016, they had the second highest share among the Gulf Cooperation Council economies of manufactured goods. The share represented an increase of 39 percentage points since 1995, which is the strongest among the Gulf economies. Dubai and Abu Dhabi are frontrunners in the UAE diversification plan. The Dubai Emirate has built modern infrastructure and instituted a business-friendly environment and regulations to promote the city as a trade and finance hub in the region. Dubai has been the most proactive player in its attempt at diversification. Its GDP is much more diverse in comparison with the Emirates. The recent Dubai Expo is one of the efforts to diversify and promote UAE as a brand to attract global business. The event has recorded more than 24 million visits and promoted the UAE's vision for the future. Abu Dhabi is also on a similar path. Abu Dhabi has been successful in creating a business-friendly environment through infrastructure. Both Emirates are also getting a lot of revenue through the tourism sector. The total contribution of the travel and tourism sector to the UAE's GDP was $43 billion, which is 12% of GDP. It is forecast to rise by 4.9% per annum, to $72 billion by 2027. There are multiple factors behind this success and diversification, like political stability, security, advanced infrastructure, and enabling legislative environment. All these factors help the UAE to achieve truly remarkable growth rates as we discussed above, and also its position across a number of international rankings. Yet like every other economy, there are some challenges that the UAE is facing. You see, even with all the success and diversification, UAE is still dependent on its oil exports for a stable economy, and only 2 Emirates are making most of the efforts to move away from the economic dependency on oil. Also, the main challenge the government faces is continued investment in technology, education, research and development, and to create a more highly skilled and highly motivated Emirati workforce. Attracting a larger percentage of knowledge workers in the country is also challenging for the government, because still many skilled workers choose Western countries for better opportunities. Now, apart from this, recently the country has been added in a grey list of financial action task forces for strategic deficiencies in countering money laundering. This means financial institutions could consider grey listing as a risk, which could affect interest rate on loans. And this designation could reduce the foreign investors to do business there. Yet in a short period of time, this grey listing might not affect the economy of the country due to rising oil prices. But if it stays there for a long period, then it could create serious problems. So, to create a fully diversified economy, the government needs to focus more on new economic sectors, such as aerospace and technology. According to the WTO's recent trade policy review, the UAE may need to accelerate ongoing efforts, such as the easing of restrictions on foreign investment, including the requirement of majority ownership by UAE nationals, and further improving the business environment to enhance its competitiveness in foreign markets. With a little more effort, UAE could achieve remarkable growth in coming years. We could see it as the financial hub of the Middle East region, and a major economy on the world stage. It has a great future and is definitely the economy to keep an eye on in the future. So, what do you think about this video? Tell us in the comments below. And if you are new to this channel, please consider subscribing. Thank you.